Motivation 1. Steps on a journey into mind, seeing, and light. Step A. Science has no explanation. It all started one day when I thought it might be fun to figure out how we see. I read what the scientists and the philosophers had to say. I studied eye physiology and brain physiology. I learned exactly how the eye, optic nerve, and visual cortex work. But I was disappointed because all this understanding did not explain how we see. After 25 years of study, I had to face the fact that science had no explanation for how we see. Step B. Think in new ways. I discovered that the only thing science knew for sure was that if certain neurons fire, we can have an experience of seeing. It was reasonable to speculate that there must be something about the neurons that produce this experience of seeing. To test this, science has probed, measured, scanned, and mapped the brain in every conceivable way. And after 100 years, huge progress was made with understanding the neural activity that happens while seeing. But after all this time, science has made exactly zero progress with understanding the conscious experience of seeing. Ironically, the seeing part of how we see is still a total mystery. You would think science might at least have a clue by now. Disappointingly, science really does not even have a clue. It became clear to me that it was time to start thinking in new ways. But it is difficult to teach people to think in new ways. And I found that I can only nudge people in the right direction, with the hope that they will eventually understand the new ways. Step C. Insight from floating lights. So here is a nudge toward new ways of thinking, in the form of a little story about floating lights. A lot of times I fall asleep on the couch in my stereo room at night. I have multiple preamps, power amps, processors, and converters with different colored LED panel lights. It relaxes me to think about these lights when I'm going to sleep. The LEDs seem to float out there in space as colored points of light punching through the darkness. It's just me, the LEDs, and the darkness. At first, because I knew the LEDs were across the room, my experience was that they really were across the room. Eventually, I realized that I could experience the lights as being close to me. I could even make them seem like they were located directly in front of my face. I assumed this was just my imagination. Step D. Conscious space. But after a while, I realized that this might not be my imagination. It was, in fact, the first evidence that I might not be seeing the physical LEDs, but rather I was seeing some kind of conscious experience in my mind. The illusion has always been that the lights were out there. But the reality is that the lights were never out there in the first place. I was seeing what I call conscious lights. These conscious lights were created by my mind and projected in front of my face. It seemed logical to speculate that the conscious lights existed in some new conceptual place, which I call conscious space. This was a completely sensible engineering speculation and scientific hypothesis. Next, it became logical to speculate that each individual conscious mind might consist of a little chunk of this conscious space. So we each have our own chunk of conscious space, and this is where our separate conscious experiences happen. Step E. Conscious experience. Let us think about seeing color, and especially let's think about seeing red. Instead of seeing red, I like to say we experience redness. This helps point attention to the redness experience in the mind, and not to the red electromagnetic wave phenomenon. The redness experience is in conscious space, and the red electromagnetic wave is in physical space. The argument is similar for any other color or combination of colors, including shades of gray from black to white. The visually impaired can consider the conscious experience of other things, like the sound of the standard A tone, the taste of salt, the smell of bleach, or the touch of a rough surface. Step F. The intermind. Science has mapped the various sensory inputs from the eyes, ears, tongue, nose, and skin to specific areas of the cortex. So, for example, we can say, first, the neural activity for red happens in the cortex. Then, the redness experience happens in the conscious mind. But we have a dilemma because this question screams out at us. How does the neural activity produce the redness experience? From a systems engineering and signal processing point of view, there is a missing processing stage between the neural activity and the conscious experience. I call the missing processing stage the intermind, because it is an interconnecting stage of mind between the physical mind and the conscious mind. Note that physical mind means the brain here. We can now imagine a three-stage diagram of mind that shows the physical mind connected to the intermind and the intermind connected to the conscious mind. I call this diagram the intermind model of consciousness. The intermind does the processing to translate neural activity in the physical mind into the conscious experience in the conscious mind. The intermind functionality might exist partly in the physical mind and partly in the conscious mind, but it might exist only in the physical mind or only in the conscious mind. Physicalists will insist it is completely in the physical mind. One thing for sure is that the functionality of an intermind must exist somewhere. Step G. Physiology of seeing. Let us talk about the physiology of seeing. Physical light from the external scene enters the eye and is focused onto the retina. The energy from the physical light activates millions of light receptors that send signals to the visual cortex. The visual cortex performs processing using a cascading, feedback network of millions of activated neurons. Since all this neural activity is correlated with the physical light, I like to call it the neural light. But we do not see this neural light. We see a conscious light seen in the mind that is correlated with the neural light. The conscious light seen cannot be found in the physical mind. I like to speculate that the whole conscious light seen is in conscious space. Step H. Reconstruction and overlay processing. But let us talk about what the physical mind is actually doing. The physical mind seems to deconstruct the scene we are looking at with the goal of detecting features of the scene like lines, edges, motion, and color. The highest stages seem to be for image recognition. The lower stages seem to be for control of eye focus, convergence, and target tracking. There are some edge enhancement and shading effects that are generated in the lower stages that can be experienced in the conscious light scene. If there is a damaged area in the lower stages, then an equivalent blacked out area will appear in the conscious light scene. If there is damage to the color areas, then the color experience will be impaired. It seems that the conscious light scene that we see must consist of an overlay of all the visual cortex processing stages. The deconstructed cortex information must be reconstructed into a coherent conscious light scene. Unfortunately, there is no known mechanism in the physical mind that does this overlay and reconstruction processing. This missing processing is sometimes called the binding problem. Since the purpose of the intermind is to translate the neural activity into the conscious light scene, it is logical to propose that the intermind must perform the overlay and reconstruction processing. Step I. 3 types of light. Let us think about the 3 types of light. First, there are the electromagnetic waves in physical space, which I call physical light. Second, there is the neural activity, also in physical space, which I call neural light. Third, there is the conscious experience in conscious space, which I call conscious light. These different types of light exist at different stages in the seeing process. We have never seen the physical light or the neural light. We have always only seen the conscious light that is in our conscious minds. Step J. An important realization. Since the conscious light is in our conscious minds, we can say the light is our own internal personal light. Even if you are a physicalist and believe the conscious light is in the neurons, it is still your own internal personal light. Since the conscious light is internal to us, we can say the conscious light is partly what we are. We can say, we are that conscious light. Or more simply, we are that light. Understanding the existence of this conscious light is the prize of these studies. For me, this was the most important realization I have ever had about my own mind, being, and light. The website will explain what conscious light is, and that it is categorically different from the electromagnetic light of science. Step K. Now what? I will now take the next step and ask the obvious question. What can be done with this new knowledge about light? The answer to that question is a work in progress.